12 U.S. Army Special Forces soldiers slipped across the Taiwan Strait at 0217 local time, running dark in two Mark V Special Operations craft, no lights, no radar emissions, no radio traffic, closing on the Chinese-controlled coastline at 45 knots with the kind of quiet that only exists when everyone in the boat understands exactly what happens if they're detected. China had spent 15 years and $300 billion building the most advanced coastal defense network in Asia, and every dollar of it was pointed at exactly this stretch of water. They were about to find out why American soldiers don't get enough sleep. The target was a People's Liberation Army signals intelligence facility on the northern coast, buried inside a hardened compound on a ridgeline 4 miles inland. The facility that had been intercepting and decrypting coalition communications across the Pacific for 3 years running. Every U.S. carrier group movement, every aircraft sortie schedule, every logistics convoy route in the region had been passing through that compound's antenna arrays and coming out the other side as targeting data for Chinese missile batteries. Taking it down didn't just hurt China's intelligence picture. It blinded their entire Western Pacific strike network for however long it took them to rebuild, and the Pentagon's best estimate on that was 18 months. 18 months where Chinese missile batteries would be firing at last known positions instead of real-time locations, and in that business, the difference between the two is the difference between a near miss and a direct hit. 18 months was worth 12 men in 2 boats. The problem was getting those 12 men to the ridgeline without the most sophisticated coastal surveillance network in the world noticing. China's coastal defense on the northern stretch ran 3 overlapping sensor layers. The outer layer was a network of surface search radars sweeping the strait every 4 seconds, backed by passive acoustic sensors on the seabed that could detect a submarine at 20 miles and a surface craft at 8. The middle layer was a series of elevated observation posts running optical and thermal cameras around the clock, each one linked to a central command node that could vector a QJ-9 drone onto a contact within 90 seconds of detection. The inner layer was a ground patrol network, PLA soldiers running staggered routes through the coastal terrain on 40-minute cycles, overlapping coverage designed so that no stretch of coastline went more than 12 minutes without eyes on it. 12 minutes. That was the window. The Mark V craft cut engines 3 miles out and switched to electric drives, dropping speed to 8 knots and their acoustic signature to nearly nothing. The seabed sensors were calibrated for submarine diesel plants and surface vessel gas turbines. A slow-moving electric drive in shallow water sat right at the edge of their detection threshold, which meant the team was betting their lives on an engineering margin that had been calculated by analysts who were currently asleep in Virginia. The boat commander checked his watch. 11 minutes to the patrol gap. Sergeant First Class Daniel Reyes was in the lead craft, running the ground element. 14 years in Special Forces, 4 combat deployments, and the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having been afraid so many times that fear stops being useful information. He had spent 6 weeks memorizing the compound's layout from satellite imagery and signals intelligence. Walking the approach route in a training facility in North Carolina built to the same dimensions. Running the breach sequence until his hands could do it without his brain being involved. The compound had 3 entry points. The main gate on the southern face, a vehicle access road on the east, and a personnel door on the northern wall that the imagery showed propped open on 9 of the last 14 nights, probably because the ventilation inside the signals facility ran hot and whoever was working the night shift had decided their personal comfort was worth the security violation. That door was the entire plan. 8 minutes to the patrol gap. The coast resolved out of the darkness ahead, a low ridgeline against a slightly lighter sky, the compound's antenna arrays visible as dark shapes against the horizon even without optics. Reyes pulled on his night vision and the world went green. The compound's northern wall sat 340 meters from the waterline across terrain that was open farmland for the first 200 meters. Then a drainage ditch running east-west. Then 80 meters of scrub brush and rock leading to the wall itself. Open ground was the problem. 200 meters of it with nowhere to go if a patrol came early or a camera happened to be pointing in the right direction. The plan called for crossing it in under 90 seconds, which was possible, and doing it without triggering the motion sensors on the northern wall's camera array. which required crossing in a dispersed line abreast formation that put no more than 2 men in any single camera's field of view at once. Reyes had run that crossing 40 times in North Carolina. He had never once found it comfortable. 5 minutes, the boats grounded silently in a shallow inlet 200 meters west of the planned landing point, 15 meters off target after 3 miles of dead reckoning on electric drive in the dark, which was close enough. The team went over the side into water that came up to mid-thigh and moved toward the shore in a dispersed file, rifles up, each man watching his sector, nobody speaking. The patrol gap opened at 0238. Reyes counted 12 seconds from the waterline to the drainage ditch, then held the team in cover while he glassed the wall. The northern door was open, 40 centimeters of darkness showing at the bottom where it hadn't latched, exactly the way the imagery had shown it 9 times in 2 weeks. Somebody inside that compound was working a hot room and had propped the door again, and that somebody had just become the most important person in the entire operation without knowing it. He gave the signal. The team came out of the ditch in a dispersed line and crossed the open ground. 91 seconds. The breach element hit the northern door and held. Reyes pressed himself against the wall and listened. Inside, the hum of server equipment and the lower frequency thrum of cooling systems running hard. A voice somewhere deeper in the facility. One voice, speaking Mandarin in the flat tone of someone reading data off a screen. No alarm, no movement toward the door, no indication that 91 seconds of 12 soldiers crossing open farmland had registered on anything inside the compound. The breach went on Reyes' count. What the team found inside the signals facility was not what the satellite imagery had prepared them for. The compound's above-ground footprint showed a single-story structure with a server room, 3 workstations, and an equipment bay. What the imagery hadn't shown, because it couldn't, was the staircase at the back of the equipment bay leading down to a second level built entirely underground, twice the size of the surface facility, running server racks that stretched the full length of the compound and hummed with the kind of heat output that explained why the door upstairs never stayed shut. 6 PLA signals technicians were working the lower level. None of them were armed. All of them were sitting at workstations pulling intercept data off antenna feeds when the team came down the stairs, and the speed with which 12 heavily armed Special Forces soldiers can clear a room full of unarmed technicians is one of those things that happens faster than the people in the room can process it. 40 seconds from breach to control. Reyes put 2 men on the staircase and turned the rest of the team loose on the server infrastructure. The demolition specialist, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, had spent 2 days in a classified facility in Hawaii with NSA technical advisors learning exactly which components in a signals intelligence node were irreplaceable under Chinese export restrictions, which ones could be rebuilt from domestic production within months, and which ones, if destroyed in the right sequence, would leave the facility unable to process intercept data even if every rack was physically intact. The answer was a 14-inch fiber optic switching module manufactured by a single contractor in Shenzhen that had a 9-month production backlog, even under normal circumstances. There were 4 of them in the lower level. Webb pulled all 4 and replaced them with demolition charges on a 40-minute timer, then worked through the server racks with thermite charges on the primary processing units, while the rest of the team pulled hard drives and encryption keys from the workstations. The hard drives alone were worth the entire operation. 3 years of intercept data, decryption keys, source lists, and targeting packages for every Chinese missile battery in the Western Pacific. All of it sitting on drives that were now going into waterproof bags on Reyes' back. 32 minutes inside the compound. The patrol cycle was 40 minutes. They had 8 minutes to clear the building, cross the open ground, reach the inlet, and get the boats off the beach before the next PLA patrol came around the northern wall and found a personnel door that was no longer propped open because there was nobody left inside to prop it. Reyes pulled the team off the lower level at the 33-minute mark. The 6 technicians were zip-tied and left seated at their workstations with a water bottle each, because the demolition charges on the 40-minute timer were going to make a significant amount of noise, and the people in the room deserved to know it was coming with enough time to get under something solid. That decision added 45 seconds to the exfil timeline, and Reyes made it anyway because there are things Special Forces soldiers do and things they don't. and leaving unarmed technicians to be surprised by a demolition charge in an enclosed space fell clearly on the wrong side of that line. 33 minutes and 45 seconds. The team came out the northern door at a run. The open ground took 78 seconds this time, which was 13 seconds faster than the approach, and a full 12 seconds faster than any of the 40 training runs in North Carolina, because motivation is a meaningful variable in human performance. And there is nothing more motivating than a 40-minute demolition timer with 6 minutes left on it. The boats pushed off the beach at 03:15, electric drives to 3 miles, then gas turbines at full power, 45 knots into the darkness of the strait with the coast falling away behind them. At 03:19, the demolition charges in the lower level of the compound detonated in sequence. The thermite burned through the server racks in 40 seconds. The fiber optic switching modules were already in pieces. The 9-month backlog on their replacement became an 18-month reconstruction timeline the moment the charges went off, because rebuilding a signals intelligence facility from a burned-out shell takes longer than replacing components in a functioning one. Seismic sensors 12 miles away logged an event consistent with a minor industrial accident. The PLA patrol found the open door at 03:23, 4 minutes after the charges went off and 8 minutes after the team left the beach. By then, the Mark V craft were 6 miles into the strait and dropping below the radar horizon of every coastal surveillance station on the northern coast. China had built a surveillance network designed to make a night exactly like this one impossible. They had layered radars and acoustic sensors and optical cameras and ground patrols into an overlapping web that was supposed to leave no gap large enough for 12 men and 2 boats. And for 15 years and $300 billion, that web had looked impenetrable on paper. What they hadn't accounted for was 12 men who had spent 6 weeks learning to move through the gaps. A demolition specialist who knew which 4 components in a signals intelligence node were impossible to quickly replace, and 1 PLA technician working a hot room who had propped a door open for the 9th time in 2 weeks because the ventilation system ran too hot and nobody had told him to stop. By 0400, the hard drives were on a helicopter heading for a U.S. Navy vessel 40 miles offshore, and by 0600 NSA analysts in Fort Meade were looking at 3 years of Chinese intercept data, decryption keys, and targeting packages for missile batteries across the Western Pacific. China's signals intelligence network in the region went dark for 18 months, exactly as the Pentagon had estimated. And every Chinese missile battery in the Western Pacific spent those 18 months pointing at coordinates that were no longer accurate. All 12 men made it back. China spent 15 years building an intelligence network that could see everything in the Pacific. Turns out they forgot to lock the back door. If you enjoyed this video, watch our video covering the US air campaign against Iran's military. Bye for now.